Hello. Hi everyone, welcome back to the stream. This is the writing a programming language in Rust stream where I'm working on, at the moment, a research-based programming language with a C styling. It aims to have maybe a minimal feature set of typical modern programming language mechanics, and from that basis I aim to create another programming language so the one I'm working on at the moment is called Seed. I'll be hoping to base a new one off of that. It'll be called Ash, with the purpose of being an alternative to Bash that keeps the ergonomics of Bash but keeps maybe more familiar C style syntax for most of the mechanisms. The environment that I'm developing this in is, first of all, it's all running on a remote host, so I use Mosh to create a stable connection to it, and then I use tmux to split the session out and add these panes. And then on the right hand side here I have an entr loop running so that whenever I change code it'll rerun the just script to run tests in particular. And then on the left hand side here I have just Vim with nerd3 installed, so a very minimal Vim setup. And then on the bottom left I have just a shell that I use for Git and things like that. So where are we in general with the project? About, I'd say, closing on the last 10% of the seed language. Most of the core features have been done and comprehensive tests and documentation have been added. Where I got to last time though is I realized that when I was just about to add support for type methods, I realized that regular methods have had a bug in them since essentially, so the current iteration of the language is the second iteration. So I had done it before but without tests and without documentation, so I basically built it again from the ground up, mostly copying over the old code, but that code actually contained a bug since who knows when. So that's what I'm going to be starting off with today, and then if we get all settled with that. Now I feel like I might have actually resolved this at the end of the last stream. Probably should have recapped on that because it was maybe a few weeks ago at this point. So the issue that I was looking at was the fact that methods weren't implemented properly. So what that meant, so I think that was the issue down here. So I think it was doing the v clone before. So let me just double check what the changes I have at the moment are. So, okay, I actually commented out the code above. Yeah, so we were doing no, that's handling for type props. So I'm looking for what code was there. So I had before prop_val.clone and v.clone, whereas now, and the second parameter in this case is presumably the source. So the first value is the property or the new value that we're accessing, but the second value is the source. And so this is what we were doing before. I'll just rerun that and I'll uncomment these lines in the test. Essentially what we're checking here is, okay, if we have, well, primarily what's happening here is when we run any kind of a method, i.e. something that has, well, essentially a function that's defined as a property of an object, we're allowed to use the, well, you can use it with dot notation or the regular, shall we say, indexing operation. But whatever way you call the function, if this is defined in it, then this refers to the object that that function was called on. And in that case, we'll call it a method. So if it has this property in particular, we'll call it a method. Yeah. Or I guess if it's defined as a function defined as a property of an object, then we'll call it a method in that case, I suppose. Now, one thing to notice as well, I'm feeling my energy a little low today as well. So what I'm thinking is I'm possibly not going to do a whole pile of talking. We'll see. But anyway, diving back in, yes, this was the issue that we were getting, and it somewhat makes sense in the context of the problem that we saw. So we can see that there's no output to standard output, and in fact when we were calling age, it was saying properties can only be accessed on objects got a function. And so the problem here was that we were setting the source to be, so we were doing a couple of things. So when we were doing, let's see, I think this is a dereference. Yeah, so when we're accessing a property, we were saying that this evaluates to this function, but it was also setting the source to be the function as well, whereas the source in general we wanted to be an object because so the source is relevant when we're calling methods, and that will be bound to this variable. And so it's saying properties can only be accessed on objects, and we got a function because we're setting the wrong thing here. And so if we change this from vclone to a clone of the properties object, and yeah, we have to wrap it in a new object, because now here we have the raw properties as, I guess, an array of our balanced tree of key value pairs. So we need to wrap that in a new object, and presumably that fixes the issue. So we should get it printing out age 20 and then age 21. Okay, line 5. The left hand side of an operation assignment must be a variable. I wonder, is that something else? Have I uncovered yet another issue? So let's see. Person age is equal to 1. Okay, so this works, but it doesn't in the context of performing this. So let's see, at least again we have the stack trace of the actual Rust part of the code. So evaluate a statement failed. That error doesn't quite make sense to me. Saying the left hand side of an operation assignment must be a variable, but oh, I looked at the item above but not the item below. I just can't read code. So operation assignment. Okay, so in that case we're doing kind of something a bit tricky. So that's just in the case of a binary, an assignment, an assignment with a binary operation with that shorthand, and in that kind of a case it's doing special handling, so it tries to read the value. So really what I should be doing here is evaluating the value, and then, because it means that if, for example, if we do any kind of a dereference like an indexing or a property access, then we're not going to be allowed to do that. So for the moment, actually, so new fix op assign with non-var. So for the moment we'll just expand that, and now this should work. Presuming that I haven't discovered any new bugs in all the underlying mechanisms. And that didn't work because the value didn't get incremented. Interesting. So let's see, print this age. So within the function, age got incremented properly. but it didn't persist across the method calls. Okay, interesting. So when I access it and increment it outside, that works as expected. But when I update it using ink age, at least, it's not working. And similarly, this will increment for the duration of the method, but if we update the value, then the value doesn't persist. And if I say something like that, yeah, so assigning to this dot age doesn't seem to. I need to figure out how to block those spam bots again. Oh well. So, this is kind of tricky. So I was doing a dereference on this. So I push a new binding. So when I'm doing this, I'm creating a new object and I'm cloning the props. Now in theory that should be cloning the props and any mutexes that they have. So theoretically an update should update the original. But no, because the object that I'm getting here, which is in this, when I update the value of this, it's the new object, not the cloned object. So maybe I can do so that's doing match eval expressions. So maybe what I can do, let's see. Now this is a bit problematic because this will make it difficult to figure out where an expression evaluation failed, but I'm not really going to worry about that now. Though I should potentially log that in the Scratch file. So we've got that. We'll match the unlocked value. And here I think we want to do value dot clone. So that's the same object. Now whether we can do that within the guard, I feel like we can't. That seemed to work. So where were we? Methods. So we get age 20. Yeah, that seems to be working. Nice. Yeah, I honestly wasn't expecting that to work. Now, here we have a lock on value that should lock until the end of the block. And here we're able to clone the mutex, I guess, even though we've unlocked the mutex. So I guess or rather cloning it isn't the same as accessing it. I mean, clearly it's not, but I would have thought it would be a similar operation, but no, that seems to be okay. Okay, yeah. So what I'm going to do is I can see that I have a bunch of work in progress for type props going on at the same time. So it'll be a bit messy. Okay, so we've got a good few bits in place. What I'll do here is unindent that. So what I think I'll do later is have some kind of a parameter here as well to distinguish between the different calls to val expression. Otherwise, I could have a type for each. I'll worry about that when it comes to it. But anyway, so I need to go to main first and undo this commenting out. Cool. And that seems to be passing the new tests. I'll add some documentation for that too. And this is also an opportunity to try out some funky parts of methods. So what do I mean by funky parts? Well, let's see, we'll have a runtime error here. Where we'll say function f, and it'll say this value is equal to 1, and that should give an error. But we'll also have a test over here where it says I'm not sure what the name of this test will be, but anyway, for the moment it'll be say person set value then person value should be equal to 1, and then we'll say dynamic method. So what will that mean? Or is there a word for this idea where so I'll call that method context change. I'll just keep it within the language of the interpreter itself. And so similar, if we have person 1 and their age is I don't know, 10, and we'll have set age is a function then we define person2 the same way, but we say that set age is equal to person1 set age, which is, I think this is kind of a neat idea. Like, I think this is how JavaScript functions anyway. Even as in, I've tested this idea out in JavaScript and it's kind of worked. I'm not actually sure how JavaScript does it, but I think it's kind of funky, the mechanism here. But yeah, if we do person2 set age to 20, then person1 age and person2 age, it should be person1's age shouldn't be affected, but person2's age should be 20. So that's true. Let's see. And let's see what error we get above. So person is not defined. So that's on, oh, because I'm only running the errors in methods. So that was in, oh yeah, so that should be set age. That's cool. All the tests are passing, and I'll have it run everything that has a method. Okay, so that's how it's going to be. It's not necessarily going to be a function. So that means you can still have pure functions. So if a pure function is, so if an object's property is a pure function as well, that's still going to be called a method. And that's going to be the case yeah, it's basically going to be, I'm not even sure why I'm holding keeping the concept of a method distinct. I mean, in theory, I feel like I could just call them all functions, and it only makes a difference if this is present or not. I mean, there's no other part of the code at the moment that refers to methods. It would really just be a conceptual thing. Yeah, I wonder. And yeah, that's a cool error. This is not defined, so it's kind of indicating that the function isn't being called on an object. very proud of those stack traces as well. That's kind of cool. Yeah, so I'm inclined to just call everything a function and talk about this. And does it make sense to refer to... So in the code, I talk about the source object. But then in the test, I'm talking about this. Does it make sense to retrofit the, like, update the code to use this terminology instead of source? I feel like source more accurately, this is more like the term this is more contextual. I think it makes sense because we're used to it. Whereas in the context of the code base, I think that source as a term makes more sense. But then at the coding level, we do have to appreciate the fact that there is prior art in this field, and lots of languages do refer to this these days. So conceptually at the language level, I think this makes sense, and then in the code base, source makes sense. Now, they don't necessarily need to use the same terminology, so I think I'll keep them distinct. So instead of methods, I'll rename this to this. And just to be clear, this functions. And in the documentation, I can use that idea as well, that this refers to the source object. And the source object can be a concept, and then this is just the keyword to refer to it. Okay, I think that kind of has sorted itself out in my head anyway. So now, one thing I need to consider here. I didn't think of this. So how about if I want to hold on to a binding? So I wanted to do person one set age, and then I did set age is equal to 20. That's going to give an error. Because it's doing this dot age. even though there won't be a source. I wonder what JavaScript does in that case. So if I did something like that person is equal to what? Age is 10, ink age, or bump age. Age plus equals 1. Oh, hang on. That should be this dot age. And if I did person dot bump age is 11, and then I did let bump age equal that, and then I did bump age, person age is still 11. So in that case, it's kind of doing similar to what I think my language will do, which is that this, in that context, isn't defined. Now, in this case, JavaScript is kind of swallowing the error. I think I'll throw in, oh, maybe not. Well, that just didn't run any tests. Oh, because it's still running methods. Oh, that's kind of interesting. This function. Oh no, I just didn't. Oh, that's kind of. I don't fully understand how that works. So that test seems to be passing. Okay, I'll just update the runtime errors test so that's not distracting me. But that, I mean, personally, I think that's cool that it works because it is handy shorthand. But I don't know how that works. Because the value that I'm assigning here, each value is always paired with a source. So when I do it like this, it's paired with person as the source. I mean, that's cool. Doesn't mean it's good. Yes, I think that it's okay. I mean, semantically, or even just intuitively, that makes sense. Like if I wasn't thinking about how this stuff works, I'd be like, oh yeah, that does what I expect it to do. then if I even do this, again, it's going to do the right thing, because by the time I get down here, I do set age to 20, again, this is the fact that I'm doing set age on person 2 is going to override person 1 as being the source when this was called. So when I call set age 40 and set age 20, person 1 is going to be 40 and then person 2 is going to be 20. Which is a little trippy, but I think it makes sense. Source change 3 person is not defined. Yeah, that's all that is. I mean, this feels like more than just a bug fix, but really the functionality was meant to have been there already. And this is just adding tests and documentation. Or am I getting an error here? This source, for example, unexpected one. Oh. More typos. Unexpected A. That's that. I really have to update this language to not need semicolons because I keep forgetting them. Okay, so function this definition. Okay, line 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What's going wrong here? Value. Don't fully follow that one. And then this, oh, I'm looking at the wrong one. This definition, line 9, object object doesn't contain property value. So I'll go ahead and do that. And same up here, I guess. Whew. Okay, that's a big load of tests on. So let's go ahead and save that. I mean, I didn't do much today so far in terms of actual new features. Just fixed a bug in what should have already been working, and it wasn't a particularly big bug either, but it did give me an opportunity to add in a big load of missing feature documentation and tests, and that was pretty cool. Okay, so let's see how we are with... I think most of the functionality will be here already. It's just that we need to update the behavior around, type prop. So that's line 685, so that's handy. That just told me where to go. And so I believe what I was going to be doing here was if type prop else do old behavior. So in the case of a type property, instead of evaluating, well, we're still going to evaluate the expression, but instead of looking at the properties of the object to find out what gets called, instead we're going to take a look at the type of the value. So we're still going to want to evaluate the expression either way. And so we'll copy this for the moment. And what we're going to do here is so we have an evaluation context. And if we find out that the value we're operating on, and we don't actually care about the value itself because we're just going to pass the value into the function as this. And so in fact we'll take a look at string first. And we will say, let's see. So we'll have context, built-ins, type methods, and type methods are going to be from strings to values. And so we're going to look up the name so it's going to be the same as what we have here, only it's going to be like this. Instead of looking up the object property, we're going to look up the type method. Value clone, and that's basically going to be it. So actually we're going to be doing type method strings, and we'll start off with that. Now that's going to need to get, I think, simplified soon enough, but for the moment that should be all right. say I'll need to clone that. I wonder why it's rendering like that. Oh, because it's rendering a list. Yeah, that's fine for the short term. So runtime errors. Prop assign on non-object. Oh, I think that's just because I changed the error. Yeah, I'd say that happened when I was trying to debug the issues with what was it? Yeah, with the method access, with accessing this on functions. So standard out, print, built in. I think that was just adding names to different functions. And have I any new tests in this so far? Have I abort the merge? Will it delete my changes? Okay, so I don't think I have any new tests added yet, other than the error tests. Oh no, I don't even have error tests added. So let's go ahead and add some type method tests. Let's see. First one, string length. always, I was gonna say always anticlimactic when things just work. I mean, there's that to it too, but also just a general sense of unease because it's like, I did a lot of work to get this running and it worked first time. I'm not sure do I trust like that. So, have I any other type methods defined? No, I think Sterling is the only one. And maybe I'll add some error tests. So that's not really a great error message, is it? It only takes one argument and I got one. So that last error as well is a developer error. Have I any other things that I can check on this? Just thinking what kind of things I can abstract here. Yeah. As I was saying earlier, a bit low energy today, so not a lot of dialogue, and I can even tell my capacity for figuring out variable names is like non-existent right now. So there are a couple of shortcuts being taken here that will need to be resolved before I actually do a commit. So I'll try and do most of the heavy lifting, but not, I guess, creative stuff today. And then when I feel like actually being able to commit something, I'll take another look at those kind of things like variable names and the likes. So in theory that shouldn't happen, but good to handle it just in case. feel like that's something that it'd be nice if our type methods, I should really call them type functions, because I was just saying how I wasn't referring to methods anywhere, and then I have type methods. Let me think. It would be nice if those functions could be updated so they always have the what are they called? Those arguments populated every time, but that would probably require a new value type. Yeah, so what's the type of built-in functions? Yeah, that's optional. I could make built-in functions in enum. And there could be one type, or it's a type method type, and then the other type is the non-method type. I think I'll figure that out later. Yeah, I've basically all of the tests that I might want. I mean, there's only one test, but it's kind of a thing where you just test them one at a time anyway. Now, another thing is whether you can. So, one thing is calling type methods. Yeah, and I'll rename those to type functions later. That could be kind of cool when you get something a bit more sophisticated. So, I mean, it would basically be the equivalent of currying, but this idea that you can bind the initial value. Or at least the context anyway. I guess that's something you can do in JavaScript as well, for example. So if I had something like, well, hello, do I enjoy Agile Scrum? I mean, is that something that people enjoy in general? I mean, I feel like it's more a tool to help you get things done. I mean, it's like it works fairly well, I think, if you're pragmatic about it and try to adapt the tools to the context of your team. So I feel like Agile and Scrum, like a lot of methodologies, do I hate Agile Scrum? I wouldn't say that I have any particular relationship with Agile Scrum. It's like it's a tool for a job, you know. I don't particularly hate what is it, hammers and saws either. Well, I find them a bit tedious to use at times, but when you need those tools, you know, they're the right tools for the job. So is there mind if I ask the interest in that kind of question? Yeah, we adapted to, again, the context of our team, and especially as our teams have grown and shrunk in size, trying to avoid them. I mean, yeah, well, that is an interesting topic, and again, why I was mentioning pragmaticism as well. A lot of these kind of things are given as a package deal, and it's like an all or nothing. Either you're doing Agile Scrum by the book or you're not doing it right. Kind of like diet plans, where if the diet works and you lose weight, it's because of the diet, but if you don't lose weight, then you didn't do it properly, kind of a thing. Where and it's kind of, you know, you're jumping through hoops to make the methodology work, but realistically you should be adapting the methodology to work for your context. And so it's one of those things for, at the end of the day, for example, the way we do it and where I work, we generally have, say, I would say we try to minimize the number of meetings in general. And I guess one of the cornerstones for me for the agile process is the daily stand-ups. And we did have issues in the past where the stand-ups were just taking way too long. And that would be because people would start sharing. I mean, the 3 points that I emphasize people to share at the start of the day is what I did yesterday, what I'm doing today, and have I any blockers. And really you should be able to rattle off those in, you know, under a minute in general. Now, the reason for those 3 questions is you should ideally be saying, if I did one thing yesterday, I'm doing something different today. I mean, there is truth in that it is somewhat micromanaging, but if you have managers and you have good team leads, that's essentially what their job is. And I guess it's all in the idea and with the objective of steering the team in the right direction. Because at the end of the day, what I found is gifted engineers are able to do amazing work and really just produce fantastic features and products, but they don't always know what are the right features and products to work on. So you could have the most amazing feature does the most amazing thing, but if no one is interested or wants to use it, then that was a big waste of time. Or similarly, I've had fantastic engineers who have really improved massive areas of different code bases, but they were not the parts of the code base that we were having issues with. So you can sometimes have fantastic engineers who get a bit of tunnel vision, and that's absolutely, the daily stand-ups are a level of micromanagement, but they're also a great opportunity. And I've gone through some colleagues with this week, that they're a fantastic way of sharing knowledge as well. So if you do have someone who is facing a blocker on the team, number one, it's an opportunity for them to get help from others who may have gone through similar steps before. So if you say, or today I'm working with cores and I'm having problems with JavaScript trying to access another server. Someone who's done that recently or even a few months ago can it's a trigger to and an opportunity to be like, oh, I worked on that problem. Let me know if you have some help because I've found it very tricky and this is what helped with me. Yeah, and that's absolutely valid as well. There are opportunities, but the stand ups, not I guess not everyone communicates and has the same preferences for communication. And stand ups are a good way of just, like I say, having the team leads check in with the team, make sure that everyone's working on the right thing at the right time. There is a certain level of micromanagement there, but again, if you're not working on the right thing at the right time, then that is something that may need to be adjusted, because especially in the likes of, it gets different when you, I guess, scale up, and where projects aren't so, in the context of a big company, projects might not be so important. In some senses, you might have things that are more green fields or research based, where it's very creative and there isn't a specific, there's a more nebulous idea of what the outcome will be. But when you have a team that's focused on delivering results, and you have someone steering the boat who has an idea of what those objectives and outcomes should be, stand-ups are, to me, a very invaluable tool for, like I say, both knowledge sharing and making sure that everyone's rowing in the same direction. Because sometimes you can, like, I have experience where some engineers, are working at the right on the right things at the right time, but also still have like a few bits on the side, and end up pulling the team into directions and conversations that might not be the right time. So it's kind of a tricky one. I mean, all of these kind of things, there is always going to be a tension when you have different people with different ambitions and different desires working on the same team. But I guess a lot of these processes are in place to try and, at the very least, get a certain number of desired outcomes in a certain amount of time. Does it work for everyone all the time? I think that's again, I mean, you could talk about any collection of people, not just engineers or things like that, and people are, it can be very difficult to get people to agree on things in general. But as a mechanism for getting desired outcomes and helping with knowledge share and just getting a good group dynamic, in my opinion, Agile Scrum is very useful. But like I say, it's, I don't obsess over it. It could have a different name. It could be, it's more the idea that I think is important, rather than, and again, adapting it to your team's needs. If you have, in general, the bigger the team gets as well, the more need there is for constant check-ins and making sure that everyone's on the same page. If you have a small number of people that are working largely independently, so again, you could be talking about, 2 or 3 developers, and they're working on totally different products or projects even, getting a catch up between all of them doesn't always necessarily make sense, because they don't really need to know what the other is working on. Now, that is also a dynamic where it's very difficult to possibly measure objectives, because everyone's working on different things at different times, and so it's difficult to keep track of. But again, that's where it comes down to adapting it for the context of your team. I mean, how to avoid agile? It I guess it depends. If I were to just have some ideas off the top of my head, some contexts where there might not be that emphasis on agile could be areas like very small scale startups where you might have one or two engineers and one might be working, like the two might be working in totally different domains. So you might have one working on the front end, one on the back end, or one on infrastructure, things like that. Or research based projects. So that could be to do with a college, it could be to do with different established companies and things like that, where again it's more of a creative endeavor and more green fields. You might have some level of check-in, but again the idea of research a lot of the time is to explore what doesn't exist, so it's very difficult to quantify what the milestones are. Now you might have some deliveries at different times, but again those are just the ones that come off the top of my head for potentially exploring. I mean, potentially, like a lot of those, I guess the nature of agile in my mind is in the context of a company or business that needs to deliver value quickly. And if you want to deliver value quickly, you generally need to have some kind of milestones and metrics and something to measure that, and to measure that you're on the right direction. And usually once you boil that down into a team level and a weekly organization level, you are talking about something like agile, or even if you don't call it agile, the idea is going to be same. Whereas if you're talking something that's more flexible, where you're not so concerned about delivering stuff immediately, yes, you do probably come into the idea of government jobs, college research where there are university research where there's been investment and you're really exploring a field but not necessarily sure of the outcomes, those kind of things. So yeah, I guess that would also be government jobs would also fit into get that category, I think. And so let me see. So one thing that I wanted to explore here was the idea of essentially having a binding. And so for example, if I went to Python 3 and I had format and I had hello that, and I actually said hello that's kind of cool. So you're kind of getting a certain level of currying behavior here, where you've provided the first argument to the method, and because of the way that syntax works, you essentially get a partial application of that method for free. Now, in the case of a method or type function that doesn't take any parameters like length, then that's of limited practicality because you're only ever going to be able to call it on that specific string. But I might be able to replace that test with something more robust in time, or something a little more fun, perhaps. No worries. Thanks very much for the question. I hope it helps in some little way. So what I'll probably do here now is first plug in, and then I might add some little bit of documentation. when I add the documentation, I might park things for today and leave it there. So let's see. Type functions are ... Hey, welcome to the chat. So there's data abstraction and is it logic abstraction, I guess. With your family, if you take a course on communication skills, I mean, on paper, it sounds like that would be the case. And is there a reason why you feel you need better communication skills in general? Provides a pattern. Yeah, that can be very difficult, and I think that's a very relatable idea in general, and I guess for a lot of us can be something that we find difficulty with throughout our lives. I mean, that's a good first step in general anyway, is to be able to identify our own feelings and emotions around a topic. Yeah, that can be kind of a tricky one. What I would say, I mean, first of all, the fact that you're even aware of your frustration is something that's good in general. I mean, it's quite easy for a lot of people to get strong emotions and not even fully recognize them, or if they do recognize them, it can be very easy to shift blame and say this is because of another person. I mean, the way I think about these things these days, and this may be getting a bit off topic for the stream, but the way I often think about these things these days is most of our reactions and relationships with the world are an internal thing to do with us. You could have the same person do the same thing to two different people and they have different reactions. So in general, the difficulty is with us and not necessarily the external thing. Longevity. Okay, so you might be referring to my bio and things like that. So I tend to refer to the longevity of programming languages and software. So the idea that if I've written a bit of code or an application or something like that, that it'll be able to survive the test of time without needing to be changed too much. So, I mean, nutrition and things like that are pretty essential as well. But yeah, I should be more concerned with my own longevity though, but I tend to focus more on the code. But yeah, in terms of the frustration, I guess at the end of the day, it's probably more important what we're experiencing and recognizing our own boundaries and things. So I guess it kind of comes down to boundaries and things like that as well. So is the frustration you're feeling potentially stemming from your boundaries being violated? And I think I've read and heard from a number of resources that resonate with me, which say anger and frustration is a natural result of our boundaries being crossed. So is someone, like invalidating our experiences, or are they talking down to us, things like that. So I think first step is like identifying those kind of things and trying to figure out where are my boundaries and are they being crossed. And from that point, it's, to me, part of growing as a person is trying to be firm with those boundaries and really clear with them, so that over time people will hopefully respect those kind of things. But it's also a thing of we can't necessarily change other people as well, so we can always hope and wish for ourselves to be understood better, but that also kind of comes down to, is the other person in a place in their life where they're open to that kind of thing as well. And that's why I say it kind of comes back to you as well. Ultimately, you have to kind of look out for yourself and what works best for you, and kind of making sure that your own boundaries are solid and not being violated, rather than trying to work and force other people to adapt to our limits and things like that. So, but it's, this is a very nuanced and almost philosophical idea that I'm certainly not qualified to talk about, but I'll still give my, my 2 cents on it as well anyway. So this provide in order to, let's see, in order to I've completely lost my train of thought here now. So with regards to, like, why do we have type functions? It's basically because when we're trying to have data and logic abstractions, those will essentially occupy one namespace of objects. Hey. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's cool. And I think the likes of ChatGPT as well these days help learn things as well, because it can even, I think one of the keys for understanding different topics is like asking questions. And yeah, ChatGPT is quite useful for that kind of thing too. And being able to look at the same problem but from like different angles. So yeah, I'd be more of a textbooks person because I like to be able to set my own speed of study. Sometimes I'm slower, sometimes I'm faster, but then I can also run out of steam quite quickly with textbooks as well. I'll get like a couple chapters in and then be like, oh, I'm not interested in this anymore. So it's like a total mixed bag. Okay, so there, yeah, two questions going on in the chat at the moment, but I'll try and address both. So I'll go with the second one first, just because I think it's a little more of an easy answer, and someone actually asked me something similar recently. And so, can you make it fair if you don't have passion in this field? And I think yes, you can, but you do have to be aware of the fact that it is a very competitive space at the moment and getting more competitive year on year. The what is it, barrier to entry is getting lower all the time, with kind of more resources to learn programming and the likes of ChatGPT helping out with those things. So while you can get far without being passionate, and like plenty of amazing developers that I know just don't do programming in their spare time, it's like a 9 to 5 thing, and that's absolutely fair. But you do have to be aware of the fact that it is a competitive space, and you are going to be competing with people that do have a passion in the field. So it's kind of a thing of, you can be lucky and just find, for example, the right job at the right time for you. But there is the fact that if you're going for example, jobs in more established companies, and especially companies that do focus on software primarily, then if a job becomes available, if you're being interviewed versus 10 other people, and 5 of those people do programming in their spare time, they have a bunch of projects and things like that, that is going to factor into potentially them being more likely to get a job versus someone who, you know, enjoys it but isn't passionate about it. So like I say, I don't think it reflects on how far you can get as an individual and like personally in terms of what you can accomplish, but in terms of the reality of the job field, I do think there, unfortunately, there is an impact. I am lucky to be passionate about it, but I also think it's a little unfair that there are lots of people who are happy to just do it 9 to 5, and you know, they're probably not going to be as competitive as the people who are effectively burning out on this stuff. So you know, it doesn't make for a great work landscape, so to speak, but unfortunately it is what it is at the moment. And in terms of learning on, yeah, well, it's kind of a see how you go. But I would say, compared to a lot of other fields at the moment, for Alo Milo, compared to a lot of other fields at the moment, I feel like programming is one of those ones where at the moment a lot of people, yeah, just eat, live, and breathe it, like software development. So yeah, you can get lucky, but it is definitely something to consider when you're looking at it as a career. And in terms of Trojan Mango, the difference between videos and books, I mean, it kind of depends. Like you say, when you're sitting down with a book, you have to, that's what you're doing at that moment, and you have to concentrate on it. But it sounds like in that kind of an instance, you're potentially absorbing more of the content, versus if you have a video going in the background. Sometimes I'm doing things at the same time, and if the thing I'm doing is more engaging than the video, then I'm not really taking in any of the stuff that the video is actually doing or saying to me. So it's kind of again, like, it's an area where it's very much personal anyway. So I would say do both and see what works best for you. For a communications course or any kind of a course, really, there might be some areas that resonate the most with you or that you might be most interested in. And I guess that's, sometimes videos can give you key points. So it can, if it's an hour long video, it might give you a couple of sections and say where everything is. But one of the benefits I find about textbooks, for example, is yes, you have to sit down and concentrate on it. But say the book has like 10 chapters and you're really only interested in one particular topic, you can just jump to that and focus then on that 100%. So it's kind of, yeah, I would say kind of like the agile question at the start. It well, like almost any question that I get these days is it depends. But I think it's always worth doing a few experiments and trying out. Yeah, and with courses, those can be a bit easier because they're structured as well. So again, you can jump to the topic that makes most sense for you. But for me, I like the ability again of textbooks where you can just skim as well, so you can kind of flick through pages and get kind of a general idea of what it's about. I feel like that's a little trickier with videos, but then with videos you can also watch them on double speed to get a better understanding. But I think skimming for me is nice to be able to do. Yeah. Yeah, and to add to what Milo was saying as well, that yeah, there are lots of resources for, well, I guess that kind of comes into the topic of like journaling and things like that as well, but I guess that's more tangential to communication skills. Yeah, though at the same time, I guess the idea of an exam is a little different because what you're talking about at the moment is more to do with actually applying it in your personal life and seeing how that works versus are you qualified to help someone else with those kind of things potentially. So it's kind of a, yeah, it's a tricky one. But like I say, I think it's worth trying different things and just seeing what works for you. The thing is, I guess when it comes to learning, we all have different approaches. For me, the number one thing, it doesn't really matter. So if I'm trying to learn something, especially when I was in college where I was trying to learn lots of things very fast, especially for the likes of exams, the best thing for me didn't really matter whether it was a video was the resource or notes or lecture notes or a textbook or whatever. uh, if I wanted to learn something and be fairly sure that I'd remember it, I would essentially just, I kept a little notebook and I would just write down questions. So, okay, here's a new concept. What does that concept mean? Or I'd try and break it down even more granularly than that. So I'd pick a few ideas and make very specific questions about those things. And I'd have like a couple of pages of questions. And then when I was finished my revision, once a day or twice a day or whatever, I'd go through all the notes. Could I remember, the answers to all the questions? Could I answer all the questions? And then if I couldn't, I'd go look it up again. And sometimes it's kind of similar to flashcards. In a way, I found it a bit better than flashcards because I didn't write down the answer. And one benefit of that was you weren't tempted to peek at the answer, which I sometimes can when I'm using flashcards. But also the fact that sometimes it was actually such a hassle to look up the answer that by the time I actually did look up the answer, I was like, okay, I don't want to have to deal with looking this up again. I'm really going to memorize it now for next time. And so that can kind of help as well. But then again, that's also more targeted towards things like maybe passing exams or learning specific domain knowledge, as opposed to if you're trying to learn skills, for example, to apply in a day-to-day situation. To me, the best way of doing that stuff is, doesn't matter how much theory you get, you just need to put yourself in that situation and do the thing over and over and kind of adapt over time. How much information do you think you can absorb by just learning the bare minimum to understand it? I mean, again, that's going to very much vary from person to person. And it also depends on the course as well. I mean, you have some courses that are more theory heavy. You have others that are more open ended. So you might have more kind of creative questions. So it's like It's not necessarily what is the definition of A, B, and C, but you might have how would you solve this problem in a creative way. And so it's that's kind of falling more into the realms of length of a piece of string. Unfortunately, just there are too many factors. Yeah, and so for things like that, skipping problem sets and things like that, it again depends on what your learning objectives are and your learning style as well. So there might be some subjects that again just make more sense intuitively, and you can skip problem sets. But I know for myself, for example, if I'm trying to learn maths, which I failed at repeatedly in the past at different levels, so if I'm trying to learn something to do with maths, it doesn't matter how much of the theory I learn unless I'm actually doing problem sets and applying what I've learned. It doesn't really matter how many videos or textbooks I've really gone through. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So that's where, so there's definitely lots of different topics like that, and I feel like the ideal with those kind of things is to be able to work with a tutor, but then the likes of ChatGPT are a great opportunity these days for being able to ask questions and ask for help in terms of learning how to solve those kind of things, because it's, again, that's nearly bordering on more creativity. Like, I would say programming itself is also a very creative subject and topic, but it's also, I don't know, it can be a different skill set for me compared to something like stats or mathematics or things like that. Who would be better at algorithms? I mean, again, I feel like I often go back to this, but it depends, and it depends on how you evaluate the answer, as opposed to, like, it's very easy to say, okay, this person did more problems, so they're better, or this person knows the information more fundamentally, so they're better. But it kind of depends on how you phrase the question and how do you decide it, like, who is better at algorithms is a simple enough question, but it's kind of difficult to answer, I feel. But if you break it down into how you're evaluating what does it mean to be good at algorithms, then you've got a basis for comparison. So if you said, okay, you are better at algorithms if you understand algorithmic complexity and you understand how to read algorithms. But then another person might say, okay, no, you're actually better at algorithms if you can actually write performant algorithms and you can do it in programming language X, Y, and Z. So it's kind of, and then you might have my opinion, which is kind of, actually these days algorithms don't really matter too much because most of the standard libraries just do them anyway for you. So, you know, there are probably better things to learn. But then I also do know algorithms, so I'm operating from a place of somewhat privilege in that regard. So it's like, it, to me, it comes down to what you're trying to achieve rather than the specifics of what you're doing right now. So for example, if you're wanting to learn how to do build a really cool, you have an idea for a web app and you really want to build that, learning lots of algorithms probably doesn't matter too much. But if you actually spent your time actually learning JavaScript and maybe a front-end framework, that's something that will allow you to build web apps. So I usually try and bring it back to what are you trying to accomplish, and then work towards that, as opposed to, that's kind of one of the beauties of university, is that you have this free time, that it's kind of a petri dish of experimentation, that you can just dip into all these different kind of things and just get a general understanding of lots of different stuff, and maybe some of it will apply in practice later in your career. But what we often, a lot of us, learn when we leave university is that, okay, actually 90% of what I learned in college isn't really that applicable here, but it's still fun and interesting to know in its own right. But then if you're talking about, okay, I actually want to build a startup and I want to make money from an app really quickly, then that's a completely different skill set, and you really want to focus on the practical things that are going to allow you to get to that point quickly. But it's, it depends on I would say it depends on your goals and your interests to a certain extent as well. Yeah, and so if your goal is to learn a lot of stuff, then just do that. If it, like, if there is no criteria, well, it's like you say, if focusing on textbooks will be smarter, does it matter? Because if your goal is to just learn more stuff, it doesn't really matter if it's a textbook or a video, that you're going to be learning more stuff anyway. And yes, you might be more amenable to certain types of learning, but you're only really going to find that out once you actually try and do that stuff. Okay, if you want to absorb the information better and learn it faster, then you're again talking more about trying to identify what your best learning style is. And sometimes that can vary from topic to topic. So for example, I was saying I usually do questions, but for example, for language learning, I do use flashcards and an app called Anki that helps me with that. Should I do practice questions and read the textbooks? If you're talking about learning new ideas and learning information better and faster, I would say yes. I think practice questions in general, and not just practice questions, but practice projects, are to me probably the best ways of learning, because you can actually spend ages just reading books, or at least I have, and very little of it actually sinks in and gets absorbed. Whereas you do a project for a little bit and it forces you to use the stuff that the material is teaching you, And very quickly you realize, okay, this is why I'm being taught this and what it actually means in practice. And that really helps solidify it. But it's kind of, you know, again, it's like an individual specific thing. Well, that's it too. I mean, I find quite often when I'm learning a new topic, you kind of need some kind of a framework for the new information. It's like, to me, I nearly look at it, at the new information as like decorations on, I don't know, a Christmas tree or something like that. The decorations are the new information, but you still need enough of, you know, enough free branches to hang the information off of. And if you don't have any context, then it just falls on the ground, and you've nothing to hang it on, and it doesn't really stick for me then. But yeah, so it can really depend on the resources you're using, on your learning style. But to me as well, even just having goals really helps, because it kind of to me helps your brain contextualize all this new information that you're getting. In this context, the type of the value before the arrow operator defines a function namespace that is being referenced. Let me just check something here. Cool. And so the type of the value before the arrow operator defines a function namespace. And what else? Is there anything else to say about that? No, I think that's more or less it. So I think there's just one test failing at the moment, and that's pretty good considering there's how many now? 200, almost 250 tests. That's pretty good going. I'm pleased with that. But yeah, let's take a look. Yeah, so for today was really just fixing, well, actually, the fix itself, I'd more or less done the last day. Most of today was just implementing tests and adding documentation for the feature that for the most part was implemented already anyway and supported by the language. So this was kind of a catch-up session in a way. And so there's a big chunk of the behavior for, or at least the work for type functions, that's been completed now as well. And most of what's left over for that is so the implementation is more or less done, but needs to be tidied up a little bit. And there's also lots of areas where it is okay looking at the moment, but I would say a lot of abstractions are going to be needed so that the code can be kept a little bit clear for the next while. I mean, so Trojan Mango, I guess just on lead code, I guess it depends on, like, I'm not fully familiar with what you mean by lead code, if it's kind of relative to pseudocode, but I guess at the end of the day, the main evaluation is whether the code you write actually runs and kind of works in the context of a computer. So I would say if that's not something you're doing already, definitely well worth taking a look at that as well. But that kind of brings us up to the end of today's stream anyway. And true. And yeah, so thanks to everyone who was commenting in. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, that makes sense. So thanks for everyone for commenting in. Today was a lot of fun, and glad I got to chat to everyone for a while and get a good amount of the new implementation done as well. So thanks very much for everyone for tuning in, and see you again next time. Take care.